Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating and honestly, a critical look at the modern workplace. We've all seen the headlines, right? The corporate statements, the glossy brochures celebrating diversity. But when you actually look past the surface, you have to ask, is it real or is it just a passing corporate trend? We're diving deep into Umer Raza Bhutta's compelling research on Pakistani workplaces to answer a pivotal question. Why is diversity and inclusion so often treated as a superficial checkbox instead of an actual strategic engine for growth? Whether you're an employee, a manager, or just someone curious about how organizational cultures actually function, this breakdown is absolutely going to change how you look at corporate policies.
So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll uncover the inclusion illusion. Then, we'll diagnose why the bolt-on approach fails and examine the burden of compliance. After that, we're going to look at some hard proof of what actually works, and finally, lay out a blueprint to upgrade to a built-in culture.
All right, let's jump straight into Section 1, the inclusion illusion, trend versus reality.
We live in a global village where trends move at lightning speed, you know? Many Pakistani companies are publicly embracing diversity to align with global norms. And hey, that looks great on paper, but in practice, we're seeing two wildly different approaches. On one hand, you have the bolt-on approach. This is where you treat inclusion like a fragile accessory. It's a tick-box exercise driven entirely by the fear of non-compliance. But then you have the built-in approach. This is where inclusion is deeply integrated. It becomes the organizational norm, a permanent load-bearing gear that actually drives the machine forward.
Because real inclusion, it goes way beyond just counting diverse hiring numbers. Honestly, anyone can hire to meet a quota. True inclusion fundamentally transforms the underlying systems of a company. It literally changes how an organization promotes, evaluates, and structurally supports every single employee. The research points out something really interesting here. While companies love to boast about merit, trendy excuses are frequently used to mask the fact that the underlying support system hasn't changed one bit.
Moving right along to Section 2, why bolt-on fails, and Section 3, the burden of compliance.
The research highlights three major barriers organizations face when they fail to integrate inclusion properly. First up is the compliance-first mindset. When organizations equate inclusion merely to meeting minimal legal quotas or just having basic anti-harassment processes in place, they completely fail to address the actual workplace culture and those hidden underlying biases. It just becomes a chore, rather than a genuine culture.
Looking specifically at Pakistan, we see deeply entrenched structural and cultural barriers, particularly for persons with disabilities. Physical environments are often completely inaccessible, and this is compounded by limited awareness and weak enforcement of laws. And frustratingly, employers will often defend this exclusion by leaning on stubborn corporate myths about reduced productivity or high costs, instead of just acknowledging their own structural biases.
And that brings us to the third barrier, a narrow interpretation of inclusion. Companies will so often hire a token number of women or persons with disabilities without actually putting any supporting policies in place. They just want the optics. But as the research clearly states, diversity without inclusion does not yield the benefits organizations expect. It's simple. If people don't feel a true sense of belonging, the whole initiative collapses.
Okay, Section 4, Proof Embedded Works, the data.
Now, we aren't just talking in theories here. We actually have a ladder of proof spanning from local public sectors all the way to international markets. A study right here in Pakistan's Special Education Department found that inclusive practices directly improve workplace culture and lead to sustainable performance. Meanwhile, in multinational companies based in Pakistan, strong inclusion practices are tied to participatory management, meaning empowered decision-making and collaboration really thrive. And looking globally, a study on European firms shows that hiring persons with disabilities measurably improves both firm performance and their reputation.
But here is a core finding from the data that we absolutely need to remember. Just increasing headcount isn't enough. For example, gender diversity in teams only boosts creativity when genuine inclusion is actually present. Think about it. If you have diverse people in a room, but they don't feel empowered to speak up, you can absolutely nothing. The culture itself must actively empower individuals to collaborate openly.
Let's wrap things up with Section 5, upgrading to built-in, the blueprint.
So how do we make a permanent structural change? Organizations need a very specific blueprint, and here it is in 4 steps. First, system integration. Inclusion cannot be a little side project. It has to be woven directly into recruitment, performance appraisals, and daily policies. Second, leadership commitment. Leaders absolutely have to champion this as a strategic priority, not just some defensive PR move.
Third, a cultural shift that normalizes inclusion in everyday practices. And fourth, measurement. As the saying goes, you manage what you measure. Organizations must consistently track the representation and employee experience data.
Ultimately, this all requires a fundamental shift in mindset. The promise of inclusion isn't just theoretical, it actively enhances culture, performance, and innovation. But to unlock those massive benefits, organizations have got to shift from doing what they feel obliged to do for compliance to doing what they believe fundamentally strengthens their people. It literally has to become part of the organization's operating logic.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative question. I want you to think about your own workplace, your managers, and your HR policies. Are they built to last? Does your organization practice true embedded inclusion that actually empowers every single voice? Or are they just applying a fresh coat of paint, treating it as a bolt-on accessory and just waiting for the trend to fade? The answer to that might just determine the future success of your organization. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive, and keep asking those tough questions.